to Solutions House. We are so pleased to have our partner in Solutions House, Google, here. I'm going to hand over to Kate Brandt right now. I'm just going to say a wonderful welcome to this space. This is a working space. It's Futera's offices. On Monday, there will be as many conversations about climate change in this room as there is today. And we are so excited to be talking about the game-changing wonder that is YouTube creators. Kate.
All right. Thank you so much, Soli, and it has been so wonderful partnering with you and Johan in the Exponential Roadmap for year 2 of Solutions House. So thank you so much, and great to be here with you all. I have to say, there's a lot of cool stuff happening this week, but this is the session I've been looking forward to the most. So really excited for our conversation today. And you know, when we think about the opportunities that we have at Google as an information company, as an innovation company, I think one of the biggest ones we have is YouTube and our YouTube creators. And it is so outstanding to see the amazing content that the wonderful people we're going to bring up here on the stage soon are creating, and so many others around the world bringing really high quality climate information to YouTube and talking about what this means in our daily lives, what this means for all parts of our economy. It's really powerful and it's really important. It's making a difference. So I'm very grateful to our creators that I'm going to bring up here in a moment, and also to the many other creators we have on YouTube that are growing in numbers. And also, I just want to note, I saw a really great piece of work that came out this week that I know our co-hosts at Futera were deeply involved in, but Unilever and Count Us In and Futera put out some really interesting research on what's holding creators back from doing more of this. And so I hope we're going to get to a little bit of that in our panel today. But I just want to acknowledge, I think that's an important conversation for us to be having too, so we can get to the bottom of that. So with that, I'm very excited to bring up our panelists for today. And I will introduce you guys and then have you come up to the stage. So Prajakta Koli, who I've met before and so happy to see again, is a YouTube creator and actress who makes comedy videos on her widely followed YouTube channel, Mostly Sane. And over the past year, Prajakta has engaged in a number of conversations surrounding climate, including a CNBC feature, raising awareness on her own channel through #RealTalkTuesdays. And in 2022, she was appointed as UNDP's India's first youth climate champion, and has been at the front lines of advocating and campaigning to highlight the impact of climate change to young people. So welcome, Prajakta. Thanks so much. Great to have you. Now, Max, we have not had the chance to meet, but I'm very happy to get to meet you today. So Max Klymenko is a Ukrainian content creator, and he aims to help businesses create impactful content and advertising campaigns online. And some of his content has focused on social causes like climate change, and he's posted short videos on ways to help the environment and the impacts of climate change on access to clean water. So welcome, Max. Mark Vins, I'm so happy to see you again. Welcome. Mark Vins is a wildlife filmmaker, aquanaut, and the CEO and co-founder of Brave Wilderness. The Brave Wilderness YouTube channel, it was launched in 2014, and it focuses on wildlife education and immersive outdoor adventures. And Mark is currently filming and co-producing a project with Leonardo DiCaprio with his Apian Way production on frontline conversation groups. So welcome, Mark. And Alice 80, who I just had the chance to meet earlier today and had such a nice conversation with. Alice, welcome. She is the co-founder and CEO of Earthrise, which is an impact-driven media company for people and planet, pioneering innovative multimedia storytelling. And Alice is also an award-winning documentary filmmaker, photographer, and campaigner focused on human stories of climate and social justice. So come on up. All right, so before we get into the conversation, we wanted to show you some videos, because after all, we're talking about YouTube creators here, and show you some of the great content that all these folks have been creating.
It's cozy up here.
Sure it is. All right, hopefully this is going to work.
My name is Mark Vins, co-founder of the Brave Wilderness YouTube channel. For the last 10 years, I have traveled the globe filming up-close encounters with the world's most incredible wildlife. Along the way, over 21 million people have subscribed and joined our mission to learn about our planet. From shark-filled oceans to jungles in the Congo, I have taken them to the front lines of conservation, where important work is being done to rewild our planet and save countless species from extinction. While my journey as a filmmaker began with a pure fascination for telling stories about the natural world, it has evolved into a pursuit to spread awareness and educate our audience about the state of the environment. I do this in the hope that collectively we can all do our part to help solve the biggest challenges facing our planet's future.
I just bought this water tank, and here's why.
Okay, it works, it works. I choose like Aquaman.
When I arrived to Mexico City, I noticed that it's very hot.
Angelica, mucho gusto, Max.
Michaela Max.
Droughts and temperature rise caused by climate change make it difficult for people to access safe, clean water.
Yo ya tengo 40 años de vivir aquí y nunca hemos tenido, le digo, nada.
One of the innovative solutions that Isla Urbana is working on are rainfall harvesting systems.
So it goes in this hole, into the pipes, straight into there.
Pues es una maravilla la que tenemos porque podemos disponer de agua.
Very nice. How much is the whole water system?
1,450.
I'd like to pay for one.
Oh, thank you for this donation.
Despite these vulnerable countries contributing to climate change the least, they are now paying the biggest price. Research shows that international organizations like the World Bank can lend $1 trillion more just by allocating their capital more efficiently. Please share this video and leave a comment if climate crisis has affected your country. Thank you.
The aim of this project is to create a film that captures the voices of everyone that sits in this chair.
Climate change by extreme weather. The COP stands for COP, Conference of
Our planet right now is running out of water.
People who did the least damage to the environment are paying for it the most.
With the platform or anyone in this room, what would be the first 3 things that we could do?
Visibilizar el trabajo de la Amazonía y también muy pronto.
¿Te puedes imaginar que solo
in Gaza with the ICRC
and why they matter?
Textiles are fundamental to every culture in the world and fundamental to life for all of us.
Hope isn't just sitting back, wishful thinking. Hope depends on our action.
Oh, what a great way to kick us off. Thank you guys for sharing that with us. I loved your videos. You brought forward so many different voices. You were around the world.
I mean, mine didn't have any voice in it. I really wish it did. I'm just like, I should do more voiceovers.
That was really beautiful. Wonderful. All right, well, let's get into it. There's so many things I want to ask you guys. Prajakta, I'm going to start with you. So you've been storytelling and sharing content online for nearly 8 years now. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you see YouTube as well as other platforms as tools to really democratize access to information and to share knowledge globally?
Honestly, for me, I think the fact that you don't have to wait at someone's doorstep, or you don't have to wait for someone to give you a chance, or you don't have to interview, or you don't have to apply to get a platform to make your voice heard is a huge you know, doorway into possibility. So I am very grateful, and I've always been very grateful to YouTube for doing that. When I started making content, I never even thought that the possibility of going beyond my countries or even my state's borders to reach out to people who don't speak the language that I do, who might not relate to the struggles that I have related to, or might not feel similarly about something that I feel or my audience feels so deeply about. But it was only after YouTube kind of put me on that platform is when I realized that it really does just come down to all of us in this together. So for me, just the sheer volume of possibility that opens up is the biggest factor.
I love that, absolutely. So Max, as a creator focused on Gen Z specifically, as I understand, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the more creative ways that you're engaging with younger generations on critical issues?
Yeah, awesome. First, I just want to apologize for the production value on that compared to these three guys. Our camera got flooded, okay, so we were just shooting on the phone. Anyways, in terms of engaging with Gen Z, like to me, I like doing kind of serious things in a lighthearted manner. I think for me, that really helps. It feels natural. I like unscripted stuff. You know, we were talking before that you've done a movie. I could never do a movie because I cannot act. So like to me, like kind of whatever happens, happens. And I think Gen Z really like this kind of content. Like, you know what I mean? The water splashed, the camera is broken. Like, you know, it's okay, it doesn't matter. And another thing is, I just thought about it on the way here, no boomerangs. I just noticed, I think I was watching the UN stories today and they do these like boomerangs. And to me, it's like, it works for millennials, just like for Gen Z, it's just not something. My sister is 16, and that was one thing that she said, just like boomerangs, straight up, out, just done.
So for people who are not creators, explain to us what a boomerang is.
Oh, no, it's like you know how when you do like a cheers or something? It's like a loop. Yeah. Like a, okay. And then it just kind of goes on repeat, like.
Okay, so no.
Yeah,
none of that.
That's,
okay.
Yeah, that's
okay. This is good. This is very practical advice. I like this. Okay. So staying with you for a minute. So you're giving some advice to the UN on what they're creating. What about for businesses? What do you think businesses need to do to more successfully create impactful campaigns for Gen Z?
I mean, from my perspective and from our work, I think putting a face on the business really helps. Like if people are kind of tired of companies talking to them. So if you have a business and you have an intern, they're probably on YouTube, on other social media platforms. If you just give them maybe a 20% raise, they would be down to just like star in the videos, and they would be thrilled. Like that really helps. If you can find maybe someone in your company, someone in your department who's down to be on camera, that works much better than animations, but some animations can be really good too. So maybe a mix.
Why are you looking at me?
No, because you guys do like amazing. Yeah, like they do. Yeah, they're really good.
We like someone relatable.
Yeah, someone relatable.
And someone who's doing the work, right? Someone who's like doing the work every day.
Yeah. So
yeah, please get in here.
Also, I mean, if companies are listening, I think just like simplifying communication goes a really long way. Yeah. For example, not everyone who's 13 right now knows what SDGs stand for.
Yeah.
We don't know all the SDGs. I mean, I don't know all the SDGs. I'll be honest, there are so many terms that come through corporate channels that are so difficult to understand, and that kind of just damps the communication, and you can't break it down, and it's useless then. So I feel like he said, like you put a face on it, maybe tell it as a story, break it down into bite-sized pieces, so that way it's easier for the younger Gen Z to consume and understand.
So cut the jargon, make it more relatable.
Yeah.
Okay, this is very good advice. I want to get you guys in here on this too. This is important. Any other advice you'd share on communicating to Gen Z, whether that's for companies, for organizations like the UN? What are we doing that can make this content more accessible?
I mean, I'm asking myself that question every single day. How do we tell better stories? And I think you're right, accessibility is a big one. And that every single day we're trying to take unbelievably complex climate stories that I spent years trying to understand and unpack. I would sign up to fucking every newsletter to try and understand this issue. I read every book. And I kind of built a platform that I wish I'd had to understand the climate crisis, but also understand it not just as science and not just through the lens of data, but through human stories. I really believe this is kind of a battle not only of minds, but of hearts. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
And I guess I just naively believe in the power of storytelling. I never lose hope in that, and I think it's about our ability to build empathy and connect with the individual. You mentioned, like, why is it important to have the person in the business? Because it feels authentic, and I think the authenticity of stories is really important, and we tell a lot of, my background is as a documentary filmmaker and a photojournalist. I found my way to climate storytelling after about 4 years documenting the refugee crisis across Europe and the Middle East. And 3 years ago, Earthrise was born with a mission to, a mixture of terror about what I was learning about the unfolding crisis. By that point, I had traveled to the front lines of Somalia to cover drought, Kiribati, a Pacific island nation that was struggling because of rising sea levels, a terror about what was unfolding, and also a massive frustration that human stories from climate frontlines weren't being told, and now that feels like it's massively shifted. We have the language for climate justice. We have this reframing of climate, not as this abstract nature issue happening in a vacuum far away, but in the here and now, disproportionately impacting communities across the world that may not be in New York, that may not be in London, where I'm from, but for whom it is very much a reality. And I love, in one of our favorite projects that we work with as a YouTube original, Seat at the Table, we were able to work with some faces and names that many people would recognize, like David Attenborough and Obama and Jane Goodall, and we saw some of them there. But actually the power of that project was to combine those voices with the frontline voices of activists and change makers across the world, across 11 countries. We were meant to do the project traveling across the world, then the pandemic hit, so it was radically reframed, working with lots of local crews, which in itself was a really, really positive experience. But to act as that bridge, and somebody on a panel said this earlier, the power of storytelling is in being that bridge, and I think that is our role. Like, scientists have been shouting about this for decades. We've had the science for decades, but our role is to find innovative, experimental, accessible ways to communicate our message and be the bridge. And even in that little short thing, we showed how many different ways we can do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think this has been coming up a lot. You and I were just talking about this before the panel, and this week I've been hearing this is a challenge I think we've had in the climate movement is we don't talk about people enough. We don't make it personal. We don't talk about it as our future, the things that we love, and frankly, the ways that we can have a better future together, right? And I think bringing it back to people, bringing in their unique voices, I think that's such an important piece of the storytelling that I know you all are doing. Mark, I want to come to you. You have, I think, done a really nice job in a lot of your work on incorporating, credible climate information and like getting us into some of the science. And it's a balance, right? Because it can be didactic, it can be depressing, but also like we want to share the science, but we want to share it in a relatable way. So talk to us a little bit more about how you think about that dynamic and what's working well in your work.
Sure, and thank you for having us here today. It's awesome to be here with Solutions House and Kate being with you, and this great panel. Really exciting information to be talking about in terms of how we're going to be able to communicate the climate narrative, and specifically the positive solutions that we know our audiences will adhere to. And I think you were starting to touch on this, this idea that creators can just wave a magic wand and just project information to our large audiences and it will be adopted is not true. It's very strategic, and we spend a lot of energy distilling information and turning them into engaging interest level stories. And the storytelling is the key element, like being entertaining, being positive, being attractive, because the brokerage we have with our audience is that we're appealing to their interests first. And if we can effectively do that, now they're willing to listen. And what's even better is if we can have partnership in that equation so that we're not only supporting good information, but we're supporting information that can have a positive outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Prajakta, I want to come back to you. I mentioned in the intro this fantastic role that you have as UNDP's first climate champion. Very exciting. Congratulations on that again. And I know part of this role is for you to be engaging with younger generations, especially in India, on climate issues. And so how are you helping to create that climate movement amongst young people in India? And what are you seeing? Like, what's happening?
Honestly, when UNDP came to us saying they wanted me to work with them, I was just like, I'll be very honest with you, climate change has been a very new conversation for me. I started a couple years ago. I was working extensively on mental health, on girls' education, on hate speech, stuff like that. But climate change was a fairly newer conversation. So I kept asking them, I said, why do you want to work with me? Like, don't you want to work with someone who has done that much work on ground and has actual impact, has actual insight? But they said something, and that kind of helped me understand my space in this fight against climate change. And I realized that although I haven't spent that much time in really, working on ground, I haven't worked that closely with a lot of people who are doing phenomenal work in India, I still have a voice. I still have reach. I still have impact. What I can do is I can be the bridge between the people who are actually doing quantifiable work that is going to change the way you look at climate action, and I can get it packaged and pieced in a way that's easy for a huge chunk of my audience to consume and use. And that is where I fit in. So what this does is that it gives me this incredible opportunity to meet people from all around the world, which is why I need to be in rooms like this, which is why I'm grateful to YouTube for getting me in rooms like this, where I will take all this information, break it down, and then put it out on my channel so that people who will be the future of our planet will kind of learn from what goes on, because these are very important conversations. These are very, very influential rooms, and these need to be amplified. So that's where I sit. It's actually been going very good. I also think that one of the things that, at least in India, two things I'm very grateful for about this whole conversation in India is, number one, there's awareness, there is conversation. I'm so glad. And number two is there's a lot of eagerness from young people, especially online, to work on it, which I think is a huge, and we are a lot of people. So that's a huge army we're talking about. So I feel very happy to be a part of this group that wants to work towards it.
And can I just ask you to build on that? When you say people are talking about it, what are they talking about? Like, what's the conversation like?
They're asking questions. That's what I was getting to. I feel like when these conversations happen, I feel like as long as they end on actionable change, we're good. Yeah. Because you will attend all these conferences and you'll leave with a lot of numbers and a lot of information. But if it cannot be turned into actionable solutions, it kind of falls flat with the younger people. Because all of us have like really tiny memories, it's out of sight, out of mind. Once it moves, and there's so much information being circulated right now that you will very easily miss out on what should stay, what can be applied to you. For example, when I first started talking about climate change, I remember doing my first meeting with UNDP, and they were like, do you want to talk about the mangroves? I said, no, let's talk about waste segregation. Because that is where the conversation starts in India. People don't know why waste segregation is important. So many homes in India, and I'm not even talking about the 2-tier, 3-tier cities, I'm talking about metros like Mumbai and Delhi, where waste segregation is not a thing. And we don't know, and the thing is, when I did speak about it in my apartment complex and my friend groups, it happened. So I feel like the gap is just the lack of communication reaching effectively to people for these changes to be made in their life. So we started with waste segregation. We started with understanding why single-use plastics are not good for the environment. Because in India, way ahead, before this was even a conversation outside of India, the government had actually banned single-use plastics for a very long time. And then suddenly, the ban, it wasn't lifted, but it wasn't taken as seriously anymore. And nobody knows why. Because nobody knows what it does. We moved from like plastics to like cups, but they are paper cups, but they're lined with plastics. So I just feel like the lack of basic awareness and information is missing. And I don't think that we have anyone else to blame for that than ourselves. We all have cell phones. We all have internet connection. We are very lucky in India to have great broadband and great internet everywhere we go. It's also very affordable. So we don't have an excuse to not know about what is affecting us. So I think where I come in is also to make sure that every now and then I speak about how it is important for you to take responsibility and for me to take responsibility and actually use those resources that we have. We're all sitting in very privileged positions where when a tragedy, like when the floods happened in Pakistan, I know the privilege I have because I felt sad because I read the news on my phone. That's my privilege, but that's not theirs. They had a very different view into it. So I feel like it's important that it's, also we are halfway through, so not a very long time till 2030, but I just feel like it's high time we kind of all take responsibility for ourselves and make sure that we actively put ourselves into this conversation and not wait for the corporates to do it or for the governments to do it.
And it has a flywheel effect, right?
Oh, yeah.
The more individuals are asking of companies are asking of their policymakers doing it themselves.
Also, it's
that can have
so
a positive
much
flywheel.
easier than it sounds sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just start at waste segregation. Let's just start at compost making. Let's just not use single use. It's so easy. The first step is so easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge problem, but like the first step's easy.
Yeah, no, thank you. I totally agree. And it's really helpful to hear what's working, what you're seeing in India that's really making a difference, that's inspiring people. And thank you for what you're doing. Max, I know you showed us a great clip of time in Latin America, but I also understand you were recently in Africa, and there was the first African Climate Summit in Nairobi recently. So I'm so curious to also hear your point of view on what brought you there, what did you learn, what role did you play, what does the conversation look like in Africa? Is it similar to India, or are there differences?
I actually didn't do all that much in that project. My team is watching now. Hi, Charlotte, Lucy, and Nadim. They are online. They're online. Yeah, so I kind of just hired them really, and then they did most of the work. But I was overseeing. So what happened there was that we were working with a group called Creative Development in Africa, and we were looking for ways to kind of spark this conversation in Africa, working with people locally. That was kind of very important to us. So the solution we came to actually initially, I didn't like very much, which was spoken word artists in Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt. And I was initially, because in London, spoken word artists is like a very popular thing, and I'm like, oh, this is like very overused. This is kind of what you do when you have like no other ideas. You're like, okay, let's do spoken word artists. But what we heard from the groups there is that like they really love it. So they just love it, and they also love these performers. So we kind of brainstormed a script so that it matches with kind of climate science, because they're obviously not scientists, nor are we. So we were working with someone to help to just bring rap, climate science, and just nice shots, cute little B-roll, etc. Into the videos. And then we made the videos. They were shown at the summit there, and yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah.
Very wholesome.
And any observations you had about the conversation that was having, or what you were hearing? What are people worried about, or what's working to help raise awareness in Africa and Nairobi?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's kind of very, very similar to the conversation we've had so far, simplifying things, just really getting rid of jargon, and also again starting at the basics, kind of how you were saying, waste management, recycling, very, very simple things, which, yeah, are also very important first step.
Yeah.
Earthrise cancelling all future spoken word. So
By the way,
that's non-planned. Don't worry.
Talking about Earthrise, you've done the Choose Earth work. Yeah. It's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. The Choose Earth, that whole piece of work is really, really awesome. You guys all should check it out.
Tell us more about this. Tell us about Choose Earth.
So Choose Earth is and it's my brain is exploding. So there's so much I want to say, but Choose Earth is a fundraising campaign, a storytelling and fundraising campaign that we did in collaboration with Brazilian indigenous leaders to fundraise for them, but also get money directly into their pockets and shift the narrative around the way that people perceive indigenous rights, to have it directed really by them in terms of the narratives, and to really make an impact, because as we know, indigenous rights feels very abstract to most people. There's a lot of stereotypes about indigenous communities, but the campaign that has happened over 3 years, we've raised hundreds of thousands of pounds and reached people way out of the environmental echo chamber, which is a blessing and speaks to impact, which is something I'll come back to, and how important that is to us. But totally forgotten what I was going to say about Choose Earth. Yeah. Storytelling. I've totally lost my thread.
Well, the other thing I was going to ask you, maybe that you can build into this, is about your theory of change, right? I think you've gotten at that a little bit around storytelling, about bringing in different voices, but how do you approach just your theory of change that you bring to life through your storytelling?
Okay, so the aim of Earthrise really is to tell stories that transform climate, culture, and consciousness, understanding that climate is in itself not a vacuum, a single issue vacuum, and our theory of change is that stories shape culture, culture shapes values, values shapes leaders, leaders shapes policy, and policy shapes the system. So there is so much unbelievable work happening across all that spectrum of things, but I understood following years both on front lines, but also out in the streets, protesting, shouting, that actually a good use of my time would be to learn my storytelling skills, and that can really have tangible impacts. And so that's kind of our driving force. It's interesting to reflect on how much has changed since we started, and so many people in this room, I'm sure, have been doing this work for many years, but from a storytelling perspective, things have radically shifted from where we were even 3-4 years ago, where we were sort of, it was like metaphorically sounding the fire alarm. We were like, guys, wake up, there's an issue, right? We were like, pay attention, this is happening. And I feel like we've kind of entered a different phase where it's more like less about sounding the alarm, but pointing people towards the exit. And it feels very ripe to talk about that as Solutions House. It's like, it's a big challenge for us to not just talk about the issue happening, but harness the power of optimism, be action-oriented, like you said, think about impact, and don't lose ourselves in what is increasingly, I don't know, I see it as like wading through mud of climate doomism. You know, we've hopefully, let's pray, sort of won the battle against climate denial, but we've just as easily, I think, entered a different era of climate doom. And so every day we're trying to work out how to tell stories that are empowering to people and make them feel, even in the face of radically escalating climate events, as we've seen even the past weeks and months, it's hard to keep count, that we can make change and we can make an impact. And I think partnering to, I mean, there's so much content out there, right? There are so many films, and certainly from a documentary filmmaker perspective, too rarely are we thinking about the piece of content, but then what comes all around that, the digital campaign that comes around that harnesses the power of platforms like YouTube, like Instagram, and that wants to link storytelling with tangible impact or behavior change. It's not enough, I think, just to make the piece of content. I think we have to think about the strategy beyond that, and that's definitely the thinking behind how we built Earthrise, is to be both a kind of production company and a creative studio under one umbrella, where we can do both those things, link the story with the impact and the action.
Yeah, and I love this. I think there's a really common theme in what a lot of you have said around make it tangible, make it feel clear, break it down, don't use the jargon, and also focus on the solutions, focus on what's possible. I really like that. I think that's such good advice.
I've just remembered what I wanted to actually say. Sorry, forgive me, I don't want to dominate the panel, but it was just, and again, it links to your point. You know, you said you're recent to the conversation and you're not an expert, but I also think in this shift, the sort of storytelling crisis challenge that we're facing, certainly I'm wondering, how do we do things differently? You mentioned rap. Like, we need to be experimenting and pushing the boundaries. Like, normal documentary isn't really having the impact that it had anymore. We need to be working with creators and YouTubers who are absolutely not climate experts. They come from completely different fields. They have totally different audiences. We need to harness the power of music, of culture. We won't really make the progress that we need to without sort of talking to the audience that we call the climate curious, this middle ground, not people who are already out on the street. You know, we've kind of got them. What about the middle climate curious group? I think being more creative and challenge ourselves to, I'm even considering comedy, and all I've ever done is really sort of documentary and human story. So yeah, narrative, comedy, rap, how can we challenge ourselves?
Yeah, no, I love that. And Mark, you know, I know something that you and I share a great passion for in this kind of conversation about our planet is conservation, is natural solutions to climate change, the conservation and preservation of nature, biodiversity. I would love to hear you talk more about that specifically, that element of the work that you do. And I know in particular, you know, I mentioned in your introduction this work that you've been doing with Leonardo DiCaprio, with rewilding.org. Yeah. How are you telling those stories, and like what's resonating with people?
Wow, yeah, it's a big world out there in terms of what is happening on the ground for conservation. And I've experienced this really organically through my work and through the, you know, my now going on 10 years making YouTube videos. And, you know, the stories are almost unlimited. You experience them, you see them, and you start to understand when you're out in the field that there's, yes, a lot of technology and there's a lot of work happening at events like this that are focused on 2030 goals, but there is a conservation issue at play as well, because we're in the middle of a mass extinction event. And if we don't save or preserve as much as we can now, by the time we get to 2030, we're going to lose a huge, important block of biodiversity. So I'm focusing a lot of my energy through storytelling on those frontline efforts and the workers that are out there every day collecting the samples and exploring the environments, trying to figure out, are species really extinct or have they moved? What's going on with the climate shift and how that's impacting environments? And I find that when you're out there and you're experiencing the lives of the workers that, through storytelling, you really can appreciate that these stories are really intriguing. Why would somebody want to move from Minnesota to Costa Rica and start an 80-hectare reserve? My friend Brian Kubricki did this, and he's now 20 years restoring frog species in Central America. And those little leads that we have, those sparks that create the story and the passion, that's really, I think, as storytellers, we're always in tune with that. So kind of getting back to the idea of experimentation, I think there's this thing that we don't often talk about as storytellers, like where do the stories come from? Mm-hmm. Stories come from experience, from doing, from trying things. Mm-hmm. So YouTube as a vehicle in general is a case study in trial and error, learning about your audience through repetition. Because that's another question we also get, like how do you know what they want to see? Well, we don't. We've arrived at it. Yeah. Getting back to your point about biodiversity and conservation, I have learned over 10 years that my audience is really passionate about these issues and about protecting species, and I use that as a conduit to tell climate information.
Yeah, fabulous. All right, well, I have more questions that I want to ask you guys, and maybe I'll get to ask you one or two more, but I do want to open it up both to our wonderful audience here in the room and also folks that are watching online. So anyone, please raise your hand. Yes, we have a question right here.
Thanks. It's real interesting to hear everything that you're talking about. All of you are talking about engagement at the storytelling level, and Alice, you started to touch a little bit on what you do afterwards. What kinds of tools do you use? What kinds of techniques do you use to actually engage the audience in behavior modification, measuring of the behavior modification? What kinds of things are you getting them to do to measure their carbon footprint or make changes in their life, start the recycling that you're talking about? And I ask because as part of Metacarbon, we build these engagement campaigns that sort of follow on the storytelling and help brands then build audience and actually help their audience do some of the things, not just learn about them, but actually do things.
We can only do that by collaborating with people like you, and it's something we're impact as a space is something I'm really interested in and really, really dipping my toes into. I mean, we're not doing it enough, and it's something that we're really passionate about. Just want to refer to film again. I don't know if anyone saw a feature film called The Territory last year, but it was an incredible Brazilian story, and they did a really incredible impact campaign. And for me, it was kind of a guiding light as a young filmmaker. Can't call myself youth anymore. Apparently, I'm about to turn 30. So. But it was kind of participatory filmmaking, so they worked in collaboration with the indigenous community that they partly filmed with. They were exec producers, they co-produced it, and then there was a huge kind of 2-year strategy beyond the film to go back to the community that had partly filmed, arm them with cameras to survey their territories, build a media center in that community so they could preserve their own language that was being lost. And they've shaped EU law on deforestation. They've done so much that took a dedicated team. And the problem is that as filmmakers, as content creators, we may have the resources to kind of do the piece of content, the film, but we rarely have the resource or the time or the strategy or the team to think beyond it. And that's the piece I'm really interested in, is how do we close that gap? How do we find collaborators like you to do that with? Because I think every piece of content has the potential to have genuine impact, and we need to kind of work out how to close that gap. And I think it's a massively growing and very interesting space, but would love to talk to you after and understand.
Yeah, it's almost like changing the paradigm of distribution.
100%.
There's by the time you're finished with a project and you're actually putting it out in the world, it's an exhaustion moment for most creatives.
Exhausted
and then there's these moments that happen. You see them with films like My Octopus Teacher, and there's so many great documentaries out there that captivate the world, and it's that should be the start. Yeah. That should be the start of the campaign, and then you can go on a tour and you can work with organizations and work to take that attention and put it to good work, good use.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, let's come to another question. I think the gentleman right here in the blue shirt was next. Yeah.
I agree with, not too much jargon, not too much science, and no doom and gloom. But when it comes to emissions, greenhouse emissions, we're sort of dealing with an inconvenient timeline in that we need to not just do good things, but do good things fast. And how do you convey that? How do you convey the sense of urgency in the sense that you can't just do these good things when it feels good? You need to do them now.
Urgency, yeah.
I'm going to try to say something smart. Yeah, I think the urgency question, for me, the first thing I'm thinking about is misinformation. And you were mentioning, Nanis, about climate denialism. In my pocket of the internet, doesn't seem to be a battle that has been won. So there is also that. I think the moment we can kind of help battle the voices that are also very loud, talking about science communications and documentaries, I think we tend to kind of refrain from making big statements and just having really nice hooks to get people in you're gonna die in 5 years unless, this is not something that David Attenborough would say necessarily, but this is something that a climate denialist or someone who's posting misinformation would do. So I think it's also sometimes just trying to, maybe to communicate the urgency, we should look at kind of what they are doing and using some of those tactics that we know work on social media, which is emotional hook, make it personal, shout, you know what I mean? Just increase the volume in Premiere Pro and just kind of see what happens. So I think maybe just trying to use some of the techniques that the other side is using to fight the good fight.
Go.
Okay.
It's your turn.
So when we speak about kind of simplifying the communication, we don't mean that don't get the right or the harsh facts through. That's not because if there's anything that the youth are ready for, they're ready for the truth and they're open and they're much stronger to understand. Like I said, we have the resources to understand, because I'm just saying, what happens when I see a creative that has a lot of big words and numbers on it, I'm going to take it and then I'm going to Google what that means. A lot can be lost in translation. A lot can be miscommunicated. That could lead to misinformation. Chinese whispers could happen, where it's a game we play in India, where you say something and then I say something and then by the time it reaches the last person, it's something else. That is a possibility because also the internet is so fast. It's immediately shared and immediately tagged and immediately cancelled and immediately commented on, and So when we speak about simplifying information, we don't mean that you don't get it through. Just get it through. For example, if we speak about the conservation that your friend is doing with the frogs, right? Your friend sitting down with a frog in his hand telling that story in 30 seconds will be more, I think, will be more impactful than a 30-second still of content that has big words. Tell me a few big words in that. I don't know. if you had to use jargon. I'm so far away from jargon, I've stopped reading it. But I'm saying, I'm just saying between these two pieces of content, the first one will work first. So we don't mean that you hold back on any information or the urgency of it. Just tell it easier.
Yeah.
I think urgency also comes from the
desire
of outcomes, right? If you look at adoption rate of things like modern technology or even things like television, they had an exponential inflection point. So you can look at that curve and say well, we eventually got there, but it took a really long time, or that bottom tranche seemed to be a real slog. And it feels like that's where we are right now. Yeah. And that's why it's so important that we have this cultural movement with content creators to be able to bring our audiences with us on this journey of being part of that exponential growth, because that inflection point should be the real target, because when that happens and you have mass adoption, the solutions come really quickly. It's just lifting it up. Like, I'll give you an anecdotal example. Like 21 million YouTube subscribers, for example. When I started the Brave Wilderness YouTube channel in 2014, we were lucky to get 10 subscribers a day, okay? If you want to put that on a time frame, I would have to live hundreds of years to have gotten that many subscribers. So I didn't let that persuade me to not tell stories. That wasn't the point. Getting to 21 million subscribers was irrelevant. It was about telling the stories I was passionate about and feeding that curiosity. That outcome is a product of adoption. And I think that storytellers are in a very unique situation where this like wellspring of attention and authenticity that we can start bringing people toward that exponential goal.
Right. All right, let's take one more question from the audience. Yeah, right here.
Hi, everyone. So I think for me, I come from India as well, and there's so many perspectives all around the world, from Black people, Indigenous people, people of color around the world, and I've noticed there's not really much value given to those perspectives versus other perspectives. And so how do we bring storytelling to create more value from perspectives of people from other culture, not for the sake of inclusion and the sake of diversity, but for the sake of actually valuing it and understanding that they are leaders in the space and that their solutions matter just as much, if not more?
May I? So, speaking of India, I feel like now, and me and Max, we were just talking about this, I feel like it's a great time to be a creator in India, because after internet services got so accessible to us, what happened was that not just the number of consumers increased, but a whole bunch of creators, like the number just shot up. And I've used this example many times, but it just simplifies things in my head. It used to be a triangle of influence with the creator ecosystem in India. If you have the most amount of numbers, you're on top. And then, like, you go down as your numbers go down. What has happened now is that it's a globe. So one person's top can be other person's bottom. It really depends on who your target audience is, who you're trying to reach. The good thing is that we have creators from I am from an indigenous community. I am from the fisherman community of Mumbai. We are Koris. So I'm a creator who speaks for that. I work with the fisherman community across the coast of Maharashtra and Goa, trying to understand how they keep their lifestyle going and how they have a livelihood with the marine biodiversity actually going down. And then we work with the UNDP to get them to have the resources that they need to start farming the fish in their waters. So collaborating with these creators and listening to voices that come from these communities and letting them spearhead the conversation is how I think you can break through to inclusivity without making that sensational. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Great. All right, well, we are just about at time, but I have one final lightning round I want to ask you all. So this picks up on something you said, Mark, which is as storytellers, you're always getting those leads. You always have your antennas up for those leads. And the great thing about Climate Week is we have people from all over the world coming together, sharing ideas, colliding in different ways. So I'd love for each of you to say, what's a lead that you got this week? What's a story that this week inspired you to want to tell?
Me? Okay. I was at a science awards last night, and there was a professor from Oregon talking about democratizing hydrogen production. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, it was obviously very dense and heavy. It was like on a granular level, difficult to understand, but I was like, that's pretty cool. And I think if I put my mind to it, I could break that down and make that interesting. So that's got my gears grinding.
All right, I love it. I love it.
Or do you
want to go?
You can go.
No, okay. So just, I guess, a note from some of the amazing sort of youth and climate justice activists. Over the years, there's been so much focus, right, on youth. They have morality and agency on their side. They are speaking on behalf of generations to come and on behalf of the future. But something that's really coming to the fore that they've been saying, which I think is interesting, is, hey, we don't want to be the scapegoat for the older generations to say, oh, the youth have got it. Like, they've got this sorted. We can rely on them. It's all good. And assuage the guilt of older generations by saying the youth the youth have got it. So I thought that was very interesting, and that's definitely a shift, because in the past few years, the youth have, have felt unbelievably empowered by how they've come more and more to take center stage in the conversation, and that's so important. But it's also, I think, an invitation to say, hey, okay, give us center stage. It's really important that our voices are prominent, but also join us and help us out and take responsibility.
Love that. Great. Please, go ahead.
Okay. This morning, in fact, I met this, his name is Vishal Kumar. He's from Dehradun in Uttarakhand in India. And he runs this nonprofit called Waste Warriors. I ended up chatting with him over coffee this morning, and we actually decided to meet up in October, where I'm going to fly down to Dehradun and then kind of vlog with this, because he had really great perspective to the solutions of, so he said that the solutions to reduce carbon emissions have nothing to do with carbon, which is a huge statement to make. And I was like, hold that thought. Make a video with me. I really want you to say what you're saying, and I want to see what the people have to say about that. He spoke about spirituality, he spoke about content. There's so many different directions that he pointed me towards, and I was just like, why hasn't this been discussed enough? So yeah, that's happening in October.
Great. All right, Max, close us out. What lead did you get this week? What stories are you going to
Okay, so I think I'm even newer to like the climate change conversation. I learned a lot actually 2 days ago about heat pumps that like aren't like really a thing where at any of the places where I lived before. And like,
I'm sorry, what are heat pumps?
oh my God, when I say I learned, I've heard. It's like this thing with a fan. It makes things better. It's like an aircon, but good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just Google it.
It's like an aircon and a radiator in one simple solution.
Mumbai is like on the sun, so I wouldn't know anything about it.
Yeah, does it make sense? Okay.
More efficient approach to heating and cooling. But there's some great YouTube videos about this.
Got it.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the comments. Got it. All right, close. Okay, so heat pumps.
Yes, heat pumps, and I'm actually looking for some stories for my channel. So it would be awesome if you guys can just give me some to film this week.
All right.
And also another thing that my grandma, so I had a chat with my grandma this morning, and if anyone knows Ukrainian grandmas, she's like she's like, so what are you doing there? Like speaking, like meeting people. She's like, what are you speaking about? Like just climate-related stuff. And she is in Ukraine now. And she just asked me to share that the Russian troops are still holding the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant hostage. That is 10 times bigger than the Chernobyl power plant. And she was like, if this blows up, as they're constantly blackmailing as they would, she's like, well, we won't have a planet to save then. I'm like, okay, I will let them know. So here it is. Sorry, a bit of a down.
No, that's very, very sobering, but very important to share that story. And very important, all the stories that you all are sharing. So thank you so much, Prajakta, Max, Mark, Alice. Thank you for all the great work you're doing. Keep telling these stories. And please subscribe to their channels so we can continue to spread the word. Thank you all so much for being here.